A warm welcome to all of our attendees, as well as our esteemed panelists today. I greatly look forward to hearing from everyone. And just while staying mindful of time, I'm going to go ahead and just introduce myself and the panel. My name is Saliha Farouk, and I am a Government Relations Manager with Justice for All Canada. You might all be very familiar with the amazing human rights advocacy work that Justice for All does. I represent their chapter office in Canada, and our work closely resembles Justice for All, based out of Chicago. So today we are presenting a online virtual seminar or webinar on the G20 summit, which is hosted by the Indian government, otherwise known as a right-wing nationalist government, that's hosting the summit in various parts of India, but most significantly in Indian-occupied Kashmir as well. I think that we are just around coming to the official G20 event in parts of Srinagar and Kashmir, which is what brings us all here today to discuss the topic. The G20 in Kashmir serves as a means to normalize India's occupation of the region, as I had just mentioned, and it's an opportunity for the international platform to come together and to discuss the implications for human rights. And while efforts are underway to enhance the region in Kashmir and to make it more aesthetic and to make it more appealing to G20 leaders and attendees and foreign delegates, it is critical that for us to remember that this region still faces ongoing human rights abuses and violations that are sponsored and mandated by the government in India. And despite the Indian government's constructing of this development to enhance the aesthetics of the region and to almost whitewash the human rights violations in the region, as well as to minimize the appearance of over 500,000 Indian security forces in occupied Kashmir, as well. Despite all of this happening, arbitrary arrests and human rights violations under this army are still persisting. So this does raise a number of concerns about the true state of affairs in Kashmir during the G20 summit. So without further ado, I wanted to go ahead and just present a short introduction of three of our speakers today, and then we'll begin. So I'm honored to share a little bit about Dr. Ether Zia, who is a respected academic, an anthropologist, and an activist known for her significant contributions in the field of Kashmir studies. She is recognized for her expertise in gender, militarization, and human rights in the context of Kashmir, as well as other contexts as well. She has authored the book Resisting Disappearance, the Military Occupation and Women's Activism in Kashmir, which examines the experiences and activism of women in the conflict-torn region. And she's also the founder of Kashmir Lit Journal. Welcome, Dr. Ether.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I want to move forward with recognizing our next panelist, who is Ali Reza Sayed. He is a prominent figure and an influential voice in advocating for the rights of the people of Kashmir. He's also the chairman of the Kashmir Council EU, which has played a pivotal role in raising awareness about the ongoing conflict and seeking in seeking international support for the cause of self-determination, equality, and improved human rights in Kashmir. Brother Ali, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
I'm also very excited to introduce a unique perspective that we have as part of our conference today, which is from Ahmed bin Qasim. Ahmed is a writer as well as a student from Indian-occupied Kashmir. He is the founder and host of the Kosher Musulman podcast, which is one of the first podcasts in the region of Kashmir, and it explores the themes of Kashmiri history, as well as Islam and colonial studies. He is the son of two Kashmiri political prisoners. Ahmed, thank you so much for your time and your presence on this conference today.
Thank you.
All right. So while we do have a couple of questions prepared for each of our esteemed panelists today, we're going to begin with an insightful presentation from Dr. Ether Zia, and I'll let her take it away.
Thank you so much, Saleha, and thank you to Justice for All for convening this virtual global protest against the G20 summit in Kashmir. It's a small meeting that they're doing there. It's not, we first kind of, to the international audience, we do want to say when we say G20 boycott, it seems like as if, we are against development, we are against something that good that could happen. It's an economic kind of an initiative. So I think that's something that we do need to talk about a little bit so that we know why Kashmiris are protesting, not just inside, but also outside. Inside, it might not seem as palpable because there's a lot of repression in this current moment. But outside, the Kashmiri diaspora is contesting what's happening inside. So first and foremost, we do have to underline the fact that Kashmir is a disputed territory between India and Pakistan, the two nations that were created in 1947. That's one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is that Kashmiris have the third party, they are big stakeholders and they have a demand of self-determination of their own, which is not really connected. It is connected politically, but at the same time, it's a very independent aspiration that the people have. So that's something that we need to foreground. And why are they against G20? Why are Kashmiris against G20? It sounds very regressive. So if there is a fire, a house is on fire, you don't go and set up a sofa inside the fire. You don't set up the drawing room. The house is on fire, and Kashmir is on fire at the moment. So you don't go inside and paint the roads and paint the walls and set up street lights and set up plazas and stuff like that to show the rest of the world that everything is normal, which is what is going on inside Kashmir at the moment, while the people, the regular people, they are literally house arrested in various places so that they can't come out. So that's Kashmiri people's normal life. And the thing that I wanted to kind of like speak to, when you were introducing this session, you were talking about enhancing the aesthetics of the region. We do have to understand that what India has done in the last 75 years, plus 75 years inside Kashmir, is that it has played the politics of democracy. It has weaponized democratic processes like voting and setting up a governance kind of a thing to tell the rest of the world that Kashmir is being governed under a democratic system. But that's not true for Kashmiri's perspective. Kashmiris from 1947 onwards have been facing a military occupation that was camouflaged as a democracy. So when India talks about development, it's actually not talking about development for Kashmiris. It's maldevelopment, it's de-development for Kashmiris. In the current moment, the unemployment rate inside Kashmir has flared up over 60%. And then most of the Kashmiri people have been dispossessed, and that has been on steroids since 2019, when the autonomy was taken away, the semi-quasi-autonomy that it had with India. It was a truce between Kashmir and India, and it was also peddled by client politicians, not all Kashmiris. So that was taken away. So Kashmiris in this current moment have been dispossessed. They have flaring rates of unemployment, and many Kashmiris who are still engaged in armed resistance against India are killed day in and day out. And no one talks about those combatants. And those combatants are ill-trained, ill-equipped. They're very young, juvenile Kashmiris. And they are being killed day in and day out without any kind of admonishment from the world watchdogs or governments that kind of take it upon themselves to look at, quote unquote, the non-West. And the other thing that's also happening is that anyone who is connected to showing some form of dissent, be that armed resistance, be that any kind of resistance, armed or non-armed, those people are being dispossessed at a greater rate. What's happening is that their properties are attached. Any kind of dissent is persecuted. And not only that, journalists are persecuted. We have many journalists in the current moment who are incarcerated. And then Asif Sultan, Fahad Shah, Sajjad Gul, there are many, many names in this current moment. And human rights defenders like Khurram Parvez and his organization completely has been repressed in such a way that no documentation of human rights abuses, that is the fate of Kashmiri people, that has become the fate of Kashmiri people under Indian occupation. No one talks about that because, everyone has been muzzled, so to speak. persecuted, thrown into jail. And that is exactly where this G20 summit is happening. Not just the human rights violations, but how is it possible that 19 nations in the G20 in this current moment will be able to and will want to go to such a place where there's such a conflagration is taking place, where people are being curfewed inside, house arrested, killed without any kind of accountability, disappeared without any kind of accountability. And this is a trigger alert. Also, rape has been used as a weapon of war. And right now, there is a lot of issues around sex trafficking happening, a lot of issues around substance abuse under the patronization of state and it's the terrorism that the Indian state is creating inside Kashmir. How is it possible that countries from all across the world, from Saudi Arabia to Indonesia to Turkey to I think Malaysia as well. I mean, I don't have the complete lineup of who is in there. And they can have their huddles and they can have their meetings in all the other places, in all the states of India. But why is it that India makes it a point to do one of the summits, to do one of the huddles inside Kashmir? And when we think of what it is doing, one of the things this summit is to kind of showcase to the rest of the world that everything is normal in Kashmir. And the way normalization has been achieved, and then that is by really repressing everyone inside Kashmir, from jailing them to maiming them to changing laws so that they can't speak. Any kind of dissent, as I said earlier, it results in so much persecution that it's unsurmountable for a lot of people, from losing homes to losing jobs to losing lives. So in this current moment, when you're having this G20 summit there, as if Kashmir is just like rest of the states of India, to show the world, and then painting the streets, paving the streets, and making Kashmir what it and this G20 meeting that is taking place, it's exactly around the issue of tourism, basically. And Kashmir has always been peddled as this emerald among the pearls. This happened in the colonial times when the British were ruling, and then whenever different colonial masters were ruling the region. In this current moment, India is also peddling Kashmir as this touristy spot that has to be developed. And that was one of the big things in 2019 when the quasi-autonomy was taken away, that we are going to develop a region, as if the region was not developed enough, which was completely a straw man argument. And this G20 summit is being peddled as if it's going to bring development, it's going to bring some kind of economic prosperity inside Kashmir. But whoever has been following Kashmir for the last 3 years or for the last 7 decades knows that what India does is it's a capitalistic, neoliberal, necropolitical, extractive nation state that's implementing its laws on this very fragile ecosystem and extracting everything that can be extracted from Kashmir, from its water to its horticulture, and now its lithium mines, because very recently lithium was discovered inside Kashmir, and that's one of the most important materials that we need for our electronic gadgets all across the world. So that's another thing that is going to be extracted from Kashmir. So what we're really seeing, this is not going to be enhancing the aesthetics of the region. It's not going to be enhancing Kashmir in any economic perspective or tangibly for people. This is completely extractive. This is completely a nation state that has imposed terror on the people and muzzle their right to self-determination, the demand that they have been having from 1947 and even before that time. So that's how we have to understand that Kashmir is burning. It's a burning house, and you don't set up these beautiful fountains inside. It can't hold. And that's what's happening. And that's what we see. We see some of the nations who are taking part in this. I think Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and I think Mexico. They are having second thoughts, and they might send their representatives rather than their national representatives. They might. That's what I heard, which is not really the kind of solidarity Kashmiri people need. They need complete solidarity. Selective solidarity is no solidarity at all. But I think at least some recognition. And then we also heard recently from the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Rights, Dr. Fernand Varenne. And he talked about, he on his social media released a statement where he talked about how is this normalization even possible? Because people, if you have to tell the rest of the world that everything is normal and you bring in military to achieve that normal, and you already have military, more than 700,000 military in the region. Kashmir is one of the highest militarized zones in the world. It's called the world's most beautiful open air prison. How is it possible to have a G20 summit there? And I think that's the question that we should have for international watchdogs, for the governments, and for all these 19 nations who are taking part in this. Why aren't they showing the solidarity that Kashmir needs? And we know that all of them are themselves facing the demon of neoliberalism, themselves facing the demon of Westphalian democracy, Eurocentric democracy. So we know what's happening with them, but at the same time, this is the least that they can do for Kashmiris, which is boycott the meeting. I think that's where I'll stop, and maybe we'll take question and answers. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much. I think that you've made a lot of very important and legitimate points. I'm going to ask you just one follow-up question, then I'll move forward to Brother Ali Raza Sayed and then Ahmed bin Qasim, and we'll go in that order. As I said, you have made a lot of good points, and I think that it's clear to see why Kashmiris might be opposed to the G20. What a lot of people are wondering is right now, isn't the G20 global platform an ideal opportunity for at least Kashmiri representation, Dr. Ether? Can this summit be considered legitimate without the voices or the representation of Kashmiris, or at least one person there on the panel to talk about not just the human rights implications, but also, for example, the environmental implications, as you mentioned? A lot of people, as well as ourselves here in Canada, we're arguing that without an opportunity for them to present, their aspirations for self-determination, it might be even pointless to have a G20 without at least that Kashmir representation. So I was very curious to get your thoughts on Kashmir representation at the summit.
I think this is such a legitimate question for someone who lives in a genuine democracy and knows what the use of the international representation coming inside a region. But if you look at it from a Kashmiri perspective, it doesn't hold any meaning. Most of these people come in insulated. Most of these representatives, they will come in insulated. They will travel a road that is heavily militarized, cordoned off. People are not going to be there, so there's going to be no protest. And they will travel from the airport, if at all, if there are no helicopters or something else that they're sorting them in. So then they will travel to a location which will again be cordoned off, heavily militarized, heavily securitized, surveilled, and then they will have their meeting, and then they will go to the touristy spot, again accompanied by army and military and whatever other government state forces you have. And then this will be very curated. They will not meet people. They will not meet any local representatives, because the client politicians inside Kashmir who used to carry India's water till 2019, they have been thrown out. They have been made irrelevant. Those people are nowhere to be seen because India directly rules Kashmir from New Delhi. It has a nominated representative from the BJP, which is also kind of like, I think for easier idiom, we can kind of say that it's a Hindu supremacist right-wing party. And that's how it's ruling India in the current moment. Not that it's anything new for Kashmiris. Kashmiris have faced the same wrath with the quote unquote secular parties and the right-wing parties. So there is no chance that regular Kashmiri, who's probably, who has some complaints or something to say about self-determination, they're not going to be meeting them. And it has the demand for self-determination has been criminalized. That's what we have to understand. Every form of dissent, be that even non-political dissent, that has been criminalized. So how is it possible that Kashmiris will look at G20 summit as a platform where they can air their grievances when it's going to be Kashmiris house arrested and these people having their insulated and curated meetings and then leaving through heavily securitized zones? And now the question might be, why don't Kashmiris come out on the streets and protest? They can't. They used to. From 2019 onwards, so many laws have been changed. They used to do it. It was still very repressed. It was still very dangerous. It was still very risky. But from 2019 onwards, what's happening is that so much surveillance and so many laws, and people have been involved. Like if there is one protest happening, if there is one person who is protesting and that person is jailed, in order to release that person or get them released from the police or the military, there are 20 people who endorse the fact that we are allowing this release and we are endorsing this release, and we will ensure that he doesn't protest. And if that person ever protests again, those 20 people are going to be arrested. So that's how they've created these mechanisms where they have not just changed the laws, but they've also kind of like, created the implosion in communities so that that protest on any level becomes very, very difficult, even for dissenters, active dissenters. And Kashmiris all have been dissenters in one way or the other. And that's Kashmir's history. And the other thing that I do want to say is this is a phase in Kashmir's history. It's a very tough phase because India has pulled out all stops in repressing Kashmiris, and that's the current moment. But I don't think Kashmiris are a hopeless people, and if anything is left with them, that's prayer and hope. And I'm sure they're huddling, and I'm sure they're thinking about, because we have seen in the last 70 years that there have been different phases of Kashmiri resistance, and this is one of the phases, and that's how I would like to see it. But at the same time, active protest, is really becoming not possible. I won't say impossible, because people still do register protest in one way or the other. Even liking a poster for this kind of a meeting is a protest. That's how I see it. Because for Kashmiris, if they like something that kind of endorses dissent, they get even jailed for an emoticon, for an emoji. So if an Instagram or Twitter, you see someone liking this kind of a post, that's part of the resistance. And you know that people are still watching and looking out to the world to see the solidarity that comes their way. But repression is at an all-time high, which is why we need to shine a spotlight on what's happening. And I do want to say that journalists have been muzzled because laws have been changed, but archives in Kashmir, the Kashmiri archives that journalists and writers had written in the last 15, 20 years, actively, those are being disappeared from the internet. Those are being actively taken down. So this is a moment where, as the international community and people of conscience, we have to keep a spotlight on Kashmir and speak on behalf, not for them, but on behalf, in solidarity.
Thank you so much. We'll circle back soon, and Dr. Ather has made a good point about the idea of dissent and jailing voices of truth. Brother Ali Reza Sayed, I wanted to talk about, your organization, the Kashmir Council EU, in light of the G20. You've previously expressed solidarity with such people such as Yassin Malik. From your organization's perspective, what does the world need to know about these numerous Kashmiri activists, journalists, and community leaders that are arbitrarily detained? And what does the world need to know about, the important work of organizations such as Kashmir Council EU? Anything that you wanted to share from your perspective as chairman at this organization?
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, you're coming in loud and clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. The Kashmir Council EU, we have started 18 years ago from Brussels. The main objective of Kashmir Council EU is to raise the issue of Kashmir, not only the issue, just to try to have the suffering which our brothers and sisters are suffering in occupied Kashmir, to highlight that and to convey their message to the institutions in Brussels, in Europe, and especially wherever we can convey this message. The people of occupied Kashmir, especially the journalist communities like Fahd Shah, Sajad Gul, and others. We were in touch with them all the time. Khurram Parvez visited us for 3 times in Brussels. I just participated in an event. The award was given to Khurram Parvez by the French organization FIDH, and there I met with the people like the Commissioner of Human Rights Council in Geneva, and we started a movement also in from Brussels to the European Union, the 27 countries, to have the signature campaign, 1 million signature campaign. And due to COVID, it was stopped for the moment, but we are going to start again, just to highlight the suffering of our people and what the Indian occupation forces are doing with the civilian population, as the India always claimed to be a biggest democracy and claimed to have the for the Kashmir, it's their two-tongue part. But if my question, always I ask this to my my friends here and my intellectual, when India is saying that it's a biggest democracy, the democratic rights are given to the people of India, but on the same time, if you see what is happening in Indian occupied Kashmir, why those, if for a second we can we think that it's a part of India, so then why the Kashmiri people, they don't have the same rights which the other Indian states and other people in India have? It is a lie, and the Kashmiris never accepted this, and they will never accept this. Kashmir is a disputed territory which is recognized by the international community. UN resolutions are there, and in this situation, if there is going to be a G20 meeting in Srinagar, I think it's the violation of international law. It's the violation of UN Charter. You know, UN Charter number 6 and 7, Article 6 and 7. What it says? It's about the people of Jammu and Kashmir and the two parties like India and Pakistan, until and unless they come to the point where they resolve this situation, they cannot have any change on the ground. They cannot have any sort of legitimacy on that. But India, what the Modi government is trying to do is to legitimize their occupation, and they want to show to the world that the Kashmir is normal. But we have some people who went to Kashmir last year and the year before. You know, as Dr. Attar was telling us, it is really, the situation on the ground is very, very dangerous. I will say that nobody can talk. Before that, there were people who were protesting. They were talking to the international media also. But NDTV has shown there was an anchor person from NDTV, and she went to Srinagar, and she was asking to the people to have some interviews, to give your opinion on how is the Kashmir now. But everybody was saying that you know better than us, so don't ask us. So nobody was willing to give their opinion because of repression by the Indian occupation forces. And the other day, I received a message from the daughter of Shabir Ahmed Shah. Their house was raided. Only the mother and she was out, and her mother was at home. And they raided. Why? Just Shabir Ahmed Shah is in prison. Like the other leaders, Yasin Malik is in prison. All those people are in prison. But why you are raiding their homes now? Just to show the others who are watching this that you don't have to speak anything because the G20 is coming. The people will visit there. But in my opinion, what I think, whatever India can try to do, they cannot hide behind these type of in these type of situations when the youth are being killed in fake encounters, and every day, almost every day, we see in media that they are taking the youth from their homes and then they are killing. The same it's happening. I think the world, what we are asking to the world is that we don't ask much from the international community. European Union, the Kashmir Council EU has written some letters to the High Representative and President of the Commission and Council. And what we are asking them is that we are not against the people of India. We are against the oppression as the Modi government stepped up their oppression in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, especially after 5th August 2019. The human rights violation, first, the human rights violation should stop. The people should have the free access to the internet and other, the basic rights should be restored. The draconian laws should be abolished. And if the situation is normal there, let the international journalists, the international delegations from the different NGOs, human rights organizations, to visit there first. And then if you want to have the meetings, you can have the meetings anywhere in India, in Delhi, and there are a lot of spaces. But if you want, it's on tourism, okay, tourism, like Dr. Saiba was saying, the tourism, you know, it is what is the behind the Modi's mind, behind the Indian government's mind is changing the demography first. They started this after 5 August 2019. Then they are giving the false domiciles to the people from outside Kashmir. Non-Kashmiris are brought in. All those things are happening. But for the development, the people of Kashmir, they want development. They want the better life. But on what expense? They want the freedom also. They want to have the same rights as other people in the world or in India. But in my opinion, this G20 meeting, which is going to happen, it is, maybe we cannot stop it, but we have to raise this issue. We have to raise our protest, and we are going to meet the institutions here in Brussels also on Tuesday, Monday and Tuesday. And we will continue raising this, the issue of human rights, because Europe, their foundation is on human rights. They always championed for the human rights. And we are asking them that we are not asking anything else from you. You can have the trade, you can have the good relation with India, whatever you want, but not on the expense of human rights, because you championed the human rights when it happened anywhere else, like in Ukraine. All the Europe is standing behind Ukraine. But in Kashmir, the people, they are suffering also there, but nobody's talking about Kashmir. So But it is on us how we present this, how we can convince them. And in my opinion, the main objective of our movement should be that we have to focus on the young generation, on the university students, in colleges, all over the world, wherever we have the possibility. So we have to prepare the next generation of these nations who can understand the issue of Kashmir, and they can be our supporter and our helpful in future. Because unfortunately, we have always, our strategy was always ad hoc strategy, short-term strategy, but I think we have to plan short-term also, but we have to have a long-term strategy also. That if we look back, 75 years has passed, and now it's 3 years, 4 years have passed after 5th of August 2019, and the time is running out. We have to prepare not only for short how can I say, short strategy for near future, but on the long-term policy also, where we can achieve. And I am sure the Kashmiri will achieve their right to self-determination. They will get their freedom, and nobody can stop that. It can take time. Maybe we want to have in our own lives, but the freedom for their basic rights to live in peace. And I will say again that peace in South Asia is connected to the Kashmir issue. It's connected to the people of Kashmir. It is connected to the human beings who are living in Kashmir. Kashmir is not far away. Today's world, Kashmir is just next door. So we have to, if we can raise the issue, raise the voice against the human rights violation in Africa, in Europe, in Middle East, or in Asia, why not in Kashmir? Only the one reason, in my opinion, is that India is a big country, big market, and the West has, or the international community has, interest in the business. But they can have the businesses with India. They can have the trade with India, but not on the expense of Kashmiri suffering. And we are looking towards the international community that they have to come forward and save the lives of the people. And because it's a genocide going to happen, what the India is doing there, systematic killing and systematically punishing the whole community, that is, in my opinion, it has to stop. And we will, inshallah, succeed in that. But we have to have work for on the strategy which the other can understand and convince. And it is our duty, our youth, their duty to convince the international community. And anyway, the suffering, there are a lot of nations. Poland, I was in Poland. I just came back today from Poland 1 hour ago. Poland was out of the map for 123 years. And after 123 years, the Poland is again a country, again a member of European Union, again the member of NATO. So I am sure that the Kashmiri people will get their freedom and their right, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Inshallah. That was something. I really want to thank you for your powerful remarks. You had made a lot of points, from everything from, making sure that trade agreements are built on human rights, to the importance of youth in leading that next generation. And speaking about youth, this is a great opportunity to ask Ahmed bin Qasim, about how the actions of the Indian BJP government have affected the aspirations and the actions of youth such as yourself, especially Ahmed, with the beginning of the G20. What do you think the role of young activists, what role do they play in advocating for human rights in the region? What does that look like in the context of the G20 right now?
Thank you so much for having me, first of all, and your question as well. Um, to be very honest, I mean, if you speak about the occupation, and let me make one thing very clear here, that what we are witnessing in Kashmir is not what is usually referred to as a mere human rights issue. This has unfortunately become a problem where it is assumed that the only thing that is wrong in Kashmir is rights violations that are occurring. By that, I mean that the people of Kashmir are struggling against what is effectively a military occupation. They are struggling against what is a colonial rule. So, even if, let's say, the Indian state changes certain policies that it has vis a vis Kashmir, and it no longer commits what we say is manifest violence through militarization, through detentions, through extrajudicial murders, and all these different forms of violence that are very visible for everyone to see. Let's say instead of this, they choose the path of summitization in the context of G20. Let's say instead of choosing manifest violence, they choose development as a tool of colonization. They choose tourism as a tool of colonization. They choose the culture industry as a tool of colonization. That would not solve the problem. So, what the youth in Kashmir are struggling for is not employment. They're not saying that the Indian state is not giving us the right to education. They're not saying, and that is true, it's not. It's not to say that the Indian state is providing them with opportunities of education or employment. They are economically dispossessing Kashmiris, and that's a fact. But the root of the problem is not this. The root of the problem is not that the Indian state is not providing Kashmiris with the right to employment, with the right to education, or the right to internet for that matter. That's not the soul of problem. The soul of the problem is that the young people in Kashmir are seeking self-determination. Every other right flows from this right. So if the Indian state gives Kashmiris every right, excluding the right to self-determination, that's not going to solve the problem. There's another way that I usually put it, and that is that it is oftentimes said that the Indian state is misusing its power in Kashmir, or that the Indian state is abusing its power in Kashmir. There's a presupposition there that there's a possibility of a just use of power by the Indian state in Kashmir, right? So, what is argued is that the Indian state is abusing its power, and things would be solved if it would make a just use of its power in Kashmir. Ask a Kashmiri student, ask a young Kashmiri boy, and he will tell you that his problem is not the fact that the Indian state is misusing its power in Kashmir, but the fact that the Indian state has power in Kashmir. It does not matter what manifestation this power takes. It could take the manifestation of carrot, it could take the manifestation of stick. That's irrelevant to Kashmiris. So, what Kashmiris are saying that what they're struggling for is decolonization, what they're struggling for is liberation. And that is one thing that we have to keep in mind. The two faces of Indian occupation in Kashmir become very visible to you when you see two things. The first thing that you see is the fact that so many young people in Kashmir right now are under illegal arbitrary detentions. So they have been put in bars, behind bars. Many of them have been extrajudicially murdered. Many of them have been expelled from employment. Those Kashmiris who speak for freedom, who speak for self-determination, they have been put behind bars, and many of them are murdered as well, in custody, outside custody. But at the same time, the same Indian state is, as a matter of fact, in order to pacify Kashmiri youth, also creating some avenues of employment for the same youth. And in the first moment, this looks a little contradictory that the state is killing Kashmiri youth, and then it's also, talking about employing them, talking about giving them scholarships. But when you understand the nature of the problem, when you understand that the nature of the problem is colonial, it makes sense that the Indian state is offering employment to Kashmiris, it's offering scholarships to Kashmiris, it is talking about development, it's talking about the promise of progress, because all of these things are going to come at the expense of the demand for freedom. So the condition here is that you would have everything in the world if you stop talking about freedom from Indian occupation. That's the latent condition that is not usually talked about. So there is this thing that we have to keep in mind when we speak about Kashmir. We have to speak of it as a problem of occupation and not as a problem of lack of development or a problem of lack of employment or a problem of poverty. That's not the problem. Anybody who is a student of Kashmiri history, and there's an interesting book that's going to come soon. It's called Colonizing Kashmir by Professor Hafsa Kanjwal, in which she speaks about how post 1947 manifest violence has not been the only tactic that the Indian state has used in order to consolidate its occupation of Kashmir. Rather, manifest violence is used when all other tactics of power fail, which is to say that when you fail to pacify Kashmiri people through promises of development, through promises of progress, through promises of scholarships, through promises of economic progress, and so on and so forth, when all of this fails, when Kashmiris still tell you that the basic right is right to self-determination and they're not willing to compromise on that, that is when the militarization comes into play. That is when the brute force and violence comes into play, and this is something that we have to keep in mind. In the context of G20 and youth specifically, to be honest, every section of society in Kashmir um, suffers under the occupation. There is no one strata of society, there is no one section of society that is reeling under the military jackboots. You talk about women, you talk about children, you talk about youth, you talk about old people, you talk about people living in Srinagar, which is a city, you talk about people living in the fringes of Kashmir, in the margins. All of them have different experiences of occupation, but all of them in different ways are made targets of the colonial violence. And that is what we have to keep in mind, that when it comes to the youth of Kashmir, what they're seeking is not representation within the Indian Union, within the Indian state apparatus in Kashmir. What they're asking for is freedom from this Indian state apparatus, no matter what face, no matter what image, no matter what manifestation that it takes at a particular moment. And that is why has the Indian state transformed the military bunkers during the G20 into smart bunkers? Why have they, created this regime of aesthetics where they are beautifying the roads, where they are, constructing these fountains, where they're doing all of these things to project a normalcy, to tell the foreign delegates that are visiting Kashmir during this whole summit, that all is well in Kashmir. And there's something fundamental that it tells you about not just Kashmir, but the politics of the world in general, that progress is usually associated with material development, that peace is usually translated into material development. That if a foreign delegate comes and he sees material development in Kashmir, he would be led to assume that there is peace in Kashmir. There is peace in Kashmir, but that is the peace of a graveyard. There's silence in a graveyard. There is calm in a graveyard, but it's a graveyard. There's silence in it because it's a graveyard. And that's the kind of peace that the Indian state has constructed in Kashmir.
Thank you so much for your very nuanced answer and remarks. I also just want to take a moment to salute your courage and your resilience and your bravery as someone who is actually from the impacted region, joining us from there and speaking on this difficult issue. I think that you've shed a lot of light on it, also from your unique perspective as a youth activist. I like that you touched on these aspects of colonization, which is something that Dr. Ether has written extensively on. Dr. Ether, I have a small question on colonization, and we'll conclude with one remaining question for each panelist. We've seen already for a long time the devastating impact of like home demolitions, particularly in Palestinian communities in the occupied Palestinian territories. And that is something that a lot of people make that comparison with occupied Kashmir. It's an element of apartheid. And similarly, recently, actually just before the G20, but it's been an ongoing issue that there have been home demolitions in Kashmir occurring there as well, which is something outrageous and absolutely devastating. Dr. Ether, if you could please shed some light on the significance of these home demolitions in both contexts, but specifically in Kashmir, and how this contributes to this larger issue of things like land confiscation and displacement and like systematic oppression faced by Kashmiris, as well as their need for self-determination, as Ahmed has touched upon, as well as Ali Reza as well.
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, we have in the last 4 or 5 years noticed the demolitions. But first and foremost, what we hear about before the demolitions occur is the encroachments. That's the name given to confiscating land, that these people are encroaching. So initially what we were seeing was that there are these people who, pastoral people who occupy the remote regions. They used to move from one province to another, and then they used to have some permanent settlements somewhere where they would keep their animals and cattle and other livestock. So initially we saw that they were being, in a big way, being dispossessed of their land and the territory that they had been holding for the last century or more. So the name given to this and the way they kind of legally, which is like an illegal legality, the way they kind of portray to the rest of the world is that we are trying to kind of like, endorse and kind of get the land together and consolidate land. And this land has been encroached by people. So initially, that's the kind of, that's the reason that they create. Because, they do everything under the garb of administration. They do everything under the garb of governance. And we have to remember that India from the get-go, from 1947 onwards, even when it took the question of Kashmir to United Nations as a dispute between India and Pakistan, Kashmiris, it was called the Kashmir question at that time. It was not called the India-Pakistan dispute. It was called the Kashmir question. And what they did at that time was in 1951, when India decided to have elections, Pakistan, of course, and of course Kashmiris and the United Nations said that this cannot be possible. You cannot hold elections in a disputed territory because the case is sub judice. But what India did at that time was it said that we do need some form of governance here. And so it kind of used the idea of governance even at that time to lay foundation of illicit elections that it holds inside Kashmir. And then when United Nations asked it about the governance factor, it said the governance is going to happen because of these elections. But at the same time, the issue of plebiscite, which was promised by the United Nations, is going to remain. We are going to take care of plebiscite. That is going to happen. So in every era, what India has used is it's kind of used this idea of legality, or what is also known as constitutional occupationalism, where they draw the bulwark of occupation is drawn from their own constitution. So it's kind of making it legal. So the alienation and the dispossession from people's land, and between people and their land, is also drawn from as if it's very lawful. So they say that they are encroaching, these people are encroaching, so we have to take their land away, we have to take their homes away. And then it becomes easy for them to demolish those houses and those homes and take away people's orchards. That's what they're also doing. Apple orchards are the backbone of Kashmir's economy. In the last 70 years, it's kind of become a big deal for them. They're taking away orchards. They're taking away the very backbone of, sometimes the orchards are decimated. They cut down the trees and no one knows who cuts down the trees. It's just like what happens in Palestine when olive trees are cut down. Then at the other end of it, what happens is that the apple is not transported in time. It rots. There are, garrisoned areas from which these trucks can't travel. So it's systematic dispossession of people at all levels. So the demolitions is one part of it. And it's not only the demolitions that they are using the reason of, or the sort of like the illicit reason of, or the camouflage of encroachments. It's also the burning of the property. For example, if they have an encounter with combatants at some place, rather than capture those combatants like you do in simple prisoners of wars, which is the Geneva Conventions. What they do is they actually burn the area, they burn the hideouts, they burn the homes of people in which these people are hiding and doing this encounter with the army or other government forces. They implode them, they use chemical flammables, and they use all kinds of bombs, and they detonate those properties. So that's also happened. So what you see, and then the other part of one is like these are regular demolitions and then the burning of properties. But on the other hand, if someone shows even a mild form of dissent or is connected to a dissenter, what they do is they confiscate their property and they seal their property. So I think Ahmed can speak for that, because that has happened to his parents' house as well. That property was sealed at some point. I haven't followed after that, but they had to face that as well, because his parents are political prisoners at the moment, and his father is serving a life sentence, and his mom has been incarcerated continuously for the last 6-7 years. So that's what they're doing. So it's a dispossession at different levels. So what they're actually doing is the structure of occupation. It's systemic violence. So it's almost like, I use this example, it comes from feminist theory. It's like a bird cage. So you look at one of the bars of the bird cage, it's like one kind of demolition, and then another bar is, dispossession of land. Another bar is the kind of unemployment. So when you kind of take cognizance of the entire cage, you see that all these impediments, all these changes that are made into regular people, which sometimes do not, as Ahmed said, do not even seem like direct violence, which is basically indirect violence. So they become the cage that is around Kashmiris. So, for example, thinking about women's empowerment inside Kashmir. For the longest possible time, we know that Kashmiri women are quite literate, more than 42%, and a lot of people would be like, so what? There's lots of women empowerment happening there, but that's you really have to go in deep to really understand what the state has done. Even with the concept of maybe local feminisms, it has co-opted women into thinking that this is empowerment while taking all their political rights away, into kind of like thinking that literacy, basic literacy, gaining education to join the mainstream is the only form of empowerment that women can have, while taking all the political rights and human rights and civil rights from the society itself. And in the end, what ends up happening is that most men are heavily discriminated through like the security is discriminated. And when we see what's happening inside Kashmir is that men are being killed directly, incarcerated directly, and women indirectly, and many times directly. In the end, what you see is implosion of communities, and that's where women are hard hit. And we see that in the Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons, where the women are becoming human rights defenders to look for the disappeared men, basically. So there is implosion of communities. So India kind of like will, as Ahmed also talked about, the idea of development, but it's maldevelopment, basically. It's implosion of communities, it's erosion, it's anomie that's being created inside the Kashmiri community. And many times they don't know what to do with these new disasters that are creeping in. And what the Indian occupation is doing is it's taking all the facets of a normal life and it's converting it into a tool and a weapon of occupation, be that employment, be that religious freedom, be that freedom of expression, all kinds of rights that make us humans. And that's what we see. Kashmiris are in this cage, and all those bars of the cage are each of the impediments and the challenges that the occupation is creating, and weaponization of each and everything. Even Kashmiri people's own bodies, they have been weaponized against them. So there's no direct answer to just demolitions, because it's everything.
Thank you so much. I'm wary of our remaining time, and for the remaining couple of questions, which I'll introduce to Ahmed and then Ali in that order, feel free to share whatever remaining thoughts that you have for the program, inshallah. So to Ahmed, kind of building on what Dr. Athar was saying to you and how she kind of referenced your lived experience as well, considering the G20 and who is actually hosting it, how can the international community address Kashmir's situation through this lens of dispossession and not just the surface level actions that you had mentioned, for example, like just giving Kashmiri youth jobs? So, for example, is this something that boycotts can address? So, like asking a government to boycott the G20, or on the other hand, what kind of actions or discussions can be taken that would ensure the protection of Kashmiri rights, not just their rights, but their self agency in the near future? And what did you think about that?
I think what you're asking is very important. So it kind of ties to an idea that we have to keep in mind when we speak about legality and law. So many a times when many human rights organizations, even the ones that are critical of India, as a matter of fact, they usually speak of the situation in Kashmir as a situation of lawlessness, as if there is no law in place in Kashmir, and there is arbitrary detentions and there is arbitrary violence, and what is required is a recourse to law. What is required is the proper implementation of law. What is required is a concern for legality. Now, in the context of Kashmir, you have to keep in mind that lawlessness is a tool, but sometimes law is the way through which oppression is carried out. So sometimes there's a lot of law, as a matter of fact. There's no lawlessness, there is complex legal framework that India has constructed, under which, while the detention of Kashmiri prisoners, including my parents and thousands of other Kashmiris, the story of my parents is by no means exceptional. All of these detentions are legal if the legal framework which you're talking about is Indian. So by that I mean, if you speak about, for example, just to give an example, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, under this act, many Kashmiri and also Indian Muslims have been jailed, houses have been demolished, and people have been expelled from employment. Under this act, any act or speech that creates disaffection against the Indian state is effectively an act of terrorism. And any act or speech that questions or disclaims the territorial sovereignty. And keep in mind that for the Indian state, the colonization of Kashmir, the possession of Kashmir, is constitutive and part of its sovereignty. So anybody who questions India's sovereignty in Kashmir is also labeled effectively a terrorist. Now think about this. A Kashmiri who believes in the liberation for Kashmir, in the cause of liberation, a Kashmiri who actively works for it, a Kashmiri who participates in the resistance movement, a Kashmiri who struggles against the Indian occupation through whatever means necessary. Are they doing something legal if the legal framework is Indian? The answer would be no, in the sense that what they are doing is a crime if the legal framework is Indian. The law might be immoral, but it is a law. So, therefore, when the international or human rights organizations ask the Indian state to give fair trial to Kashmiri political prisoners, that's not really solving the problem. That's not solving the problem because you're not addressing the question of under which legal framework are they going to get their free trial, their fair trial. If the legal framework is going to be Indian, they're going to stay behind bars. And we saw this in the case of Yasin Malik, for example. For a Kashmiri who has struggled for liberation, the only way he can get some relief from the Indian legal framework is by saying that he's not part of the resistance movement. That's the only way he can get some degree of relief, is by disassociating himself from the cause of freedom, from the cause of liberation. So one thing, speaking to your question, we have to keep in mind when we living outside ask different countries, be it in Europe, be it elsewhere, to address this problem, we have to keep in mind that the solution to the problem in Kashmir cannot emerge from within India. It cannot emerge from within the Indian state apparatus. So boycott is one tactic that could be used. But when the United States, or when any other country for that matter, asks India to uphold law in the context of Kashmir, it's not really solving the problem. Athar briefly spoke about religious freedoms, and I would like to touch upon that a little bit. So, religious freedoms, for instance, recently during Eid, the congregations were banned in Jamia Masjid. Jamia Masjid has People have not been allowed to pray in the Jamia Masjid for more than 3 years now. And the chief sermon in the mosque, Mirwais Umar Farooq, he has been kept in detention, house detention. He's not been allowed to go and lead people in prayers. In Tihar jail, where Kashmiri women are in jail, tie this to the question of women empowerment. So the Indian state is cultivating what you could refer to as colonial or state feminism in Kashmir. It is speaking of women empowerment. At the same time, it has jailed Kashmiri women, including old women, including young Kashmiri female women who are in their 30s, who are part of the resistance movement in prison. So they speak of women empowerment to pacify the resistance in Kashmir. At the same time, they jail any Kashmiri woman who speaks of liberation, who speaks of freedom. Now, these women, this includes my mother, but also includes another Kashmiri female resistance leader called Nahida Nasreen, includes a very young Kashmiri female political prisoner. Her name is Sophie Fahmida. She's in her 30s and she has been bedridden in Tihar jail of New Delhi for the past 3 years. She cannot move without assistance anymore because they have been kept in small cells in the prison. Just yesterday or a day before, a prominent Kashmir resistance leader called Shabir Shah, he's in prison, but the National Investigation Agency of India, which the Indian state has used in order to, in order to curb the self-determination movement in Kashmir through raids, through dispossessions, through all these different tactics, through property seizures. They went in the house of Shabir Shah, ransacked the property, intimidated the family, despite the fact that the person is already in jail. But they are trying to break his will while he is in prison by going after his family, and they know that that's the only way to break his conviction. That's the weakness that he has when you go after his family, when you make him feel that his family is vulnerable too. And this is a tactic that they have used not only against Shabir Shah's family, but against the family of effectively every Kashmiri resistance leader. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. And as the last point, we also have to keep in mind when we speak of religious freedoms, for example, while the mosques are closed. Recently, there was a Kashmiri imam who, in one of the gatherings, spoke about settler colonialism, who told the people to keep in mind that what is happening in Kashmir is essentially settler colonization, where the Indian state is trying to transform the Kashmiri Muslim majority into a minority. He was an FIR was lodged against him. He was summoned by the police, and he was intimidated. At the same time, while they are persecuting Kashmiri Muslims, not allowing them, the practice of their religion, at the same time, Amarnath Yatra, which is a Hindu Brahman Yatra, a Hindu pilgrimage, that is given active state support. So usually it used to be for 40 days or 42 days. This year it has been extended to 60 days. The Amarnath Yatra, while it's happening, the Kashmiri Muslims are not allowed to travel. They're not allowed to use the roads. Militarization is increased, surveillance is increased, and at the same time, this Amarnath Yatra is given complete protection, you know, uh, and that shows you the Islamophobia and the Hindutva that is integral to India's governance in Kashmir, where the suppression of Kashmiri Muslims and the empowerment and the protection of Brahmins specifically, but Hindu rights generally, is the logic of Indian governance in Kashmir. And that is another facet that we have to keep in mind. And as a last point, while these religious freedoms are being violated, it is very easy for someone to see the closure of a mosque, the disallowing of prayers, and say that the violation of religious freedoms is happening. But there's another way the violation of religious freedoms happens, and usually this is not noticed, and usually this is not spoken about. So someone might, looking from outside, looking at Kashmir, see people going to mosques, see Kashmiri women observing hijab. As we know, in different parts of India, Karnataka, for example, there was a hijab ban recently. They might see Kashmiri women practicing hijab, and they might see all is well in Kashmir. People are practicing their religion, they're going to mosques with some occasional curbs, and women are, able to do hijab. So what's wrong in Kashmir? There is no violation of religious freedoms. One way of violating the religious freedom of people is by not allowing them to participate in religious congregations in mosques. Another way you control the religious freedoms of Kashmir is by allowing them to go to the mosque, but by controlling what is done and said in the mosque. So, a Kashmiri Imam who is allowed to speak to the people during a Friday congregation, while there is a permission that you can go and congregate for the purpose of Friday, if he speaks during the khutbah while he's speaking to the people, if he speaks about the questions of oppression, if he speaks about the questions pertaining to struggle against oppression, if he speaks about how our religion tells us to struggle against the oppression and come to the aid of the oppressed, in that moment, he would be put in detention and the mosque would be closed and people would not be allowed to congregate anymore. So that tells you the kind of the flexibility of India's rule in Kashmir. They are not always going at people with the iron fist. And if we don't keep this in mind, it's very easy for India to deceive those people, who are sitting outside and looking at Kashmir by telling them that, look, all is well in Kashmir. People are practicing their religion, everything is fine. So this is something that we have to keep in mind. In Tihar jail of New Delhi, Hindu idols have been installed in the barracks of Muslim prisoners. Why is this being done? If you have Muslim prisoners in a barrack, which barrack is a, how do I say it? It's a small compartment where some prisoners are kept. If you have Muslim prisoners in it, why would you install Hindu idols in it? The only reason that is being done is to psychologically torment the prisoners, is to constantly browbeat them into humiliation. Not only the installation of idols, in every cell, in every prison cell, and I was speaking to my own mother, she told me that in every prison cell, loudspeakers have been installed. And in these loudspeakers, Hindu hymns are constantly played. Now, why are these Hindu hymns being played and Muslim prisoners are being made to, listen to all these Hindu hymns? Is because what we're talking about is a Hindu state. What we're talking about is what could be referred to as a Hindu nationalist state, where nothing else, no other community would ever be allowed to flourish. And that's why we see violence being perpetrated not only against Kashmiri Muslims who are not an Indian minority. And this is also what we have to keep in mind, that while there is considerable overlap now in the tactics of oppression that the Indian state deploys against the Muslims in India and the Muslims of Kashmir. And I'm separating them. I'm separating them because we have to keep in mind that Kashmiris do not see themselves as an Indian minority, be it even if it's a marginalized minority. They see themselves as occupied people, as opposed to Indian Muslims who might see themselves as a marginalized religious minority within the Indian nation state. So this is something that we have to keep in mind. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. And I think that these details and these insights are so critical to see. And sometimes you could release a million statements and put out so many social media posts, and it does not compare to kind of listening to someone directly. So we do thank you for these important facts that you're bringing up. In the remaining 5 minutes or so that I have, I wanted to ask Brother Ali Raza, building off of what Brother Ahmed had said, similar to organizations like yours, the Kashmir Council EU, organizations like mine or other NGOs and human rights groups, like, for example, I'm constantly meeting with Canadian members of parliament, constantly talking to them about the Indian occupation in Kashmir, and similarly around the world in Commonwealth countries and democratic countries, people are actually bringing their concerns to their respective governments. But my question to you is, what should our demands be? Do you think it's important for all of us groups to be on the same page and to have consistent arguments? Is there like a strategy that you can advise to all human rights groups from your perspective at the Kashmir Council EU? Inshallah, let us know in the last couple of minutes that we have.
Thank you. I think it is to succeed in our to achieve our objective of freedom and objective of achieving the basic rights as per given by the United Nations Charter. It is imperative that we all the organization, all the people who are working from the diaspora and the people on the ground. I am very much touched with Ahmed's what he was saying about what is happening. He's on ground. we don't know all these things when we are outside, because we are depending on the some media reports or some contacts. Even I have some contact in Srinagar, but they are not talking on phone. They says don't talk. So just family talks or other things, but not about anything which is related to our rights or for the freedom. But to be successful, we have to have the coordination between our groups, all the groups, and have a common strategy. As Ahmed was saying, it is for the right to self-determination, and to raise the issue in front of where I am living in Western Europe and in Canada or in US especially. These the human rights violations should be on the top of agenda, because the public opinion you can change by showing what the India is doing in occupied Kashmir. And the stories like Ahmed was telling us, these stories should come up, and we have to go with these stories. The victims' stories. I will tell you, we have a hearing here in European Parliament in 2019, and that hearing was on the girl called Insha. She was wounded by pellet gun used by the Indian occupation forces. And these type of stories, the people, they take interest. And then the people, if you convince the people about your the situation, they can put pressure on their representative. And what we are trying to do is that to convince the people, tell the stories, tell the situation of the on ground, and they can talk to their representatives. And then representatives, they cannot ignore their constituency, because the constituent are asking them to speak about this issue. And that's a way to move forward, in my opinion. And universities also, the student, they have the human rights groups in the universities, and those groups should be contacted, and we are trying to contact here in Europe, and those can spread the current situation or the situation on ground, and that can get the support of their colleagues. And those youth, they will be in practical life in 1, 2, 3 years, and when they are in a position, there they can support our cause, and especially our for me and for Kashmir Council EU, the main objective is to reduce or to end the suffering of our people. That is the first priority. How we can end that suffering, and continue consistently about the situation on the ground, and to show to the world. And I am hopeful that the day will come that the international community will stand behind the Kashmiris, inshallah.
Thank you for ending it off on such a beautiful note. For our attendees on the panel today, I wanted to encourage you to support all of our respective experts that have spoken really from their heart and from their expertise. You can find Ahmed bin Qasim's podcast, Kosher Musliman, on most podcast platforms if you just Google it. You can also support, if you live in the EU, Ali Reza Sayed's organization, which is the Kashmir Council EU. Dr. Athar does have a number of writings and poetry and academic research that you should follow and support and get in tune with. To learn more on this wide-ranging issue. I've heard from a lot of people that this has been a very interesting discussion, and for the interest of time, unfortunately, we do have to end it, but we will be having more advocacy on the issue of the G20 being held in Indian-occupied Kashmir do look out on both the Justice for All and Justice for All Canada platforms on different ways that you can get involved and take action from your respective region, wherever you are in the world. And a big thank you to all of our esteemed panelists for your valuable and your generous time today. It's been quite heartening and a wonderful time to hear from you and to learn from you. And I'm sure everyone here agrees with me. I leave everyone with the Islamic greetings of peace and salam and safety and to love for everyone wherever you are. Have a good day, inshallah. Take care.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you.